culture just is so deeply entrenched in like how to make a livable city. And when you think about livable cities, like the things you're taught in school is you're like green cities. You talk about affordable housing.
Yeah.
You talk about like kind of like social planning, which like touches on culture, but it's not almost at the same rank. And I view it as like such an integral part. Like you can go to the most eco-friendly city in the world, the most affordable city in the world, but is it going to be alive if it doesn't have culture? So for me, it's like one of those like core pillars of like.
Hello and welcome to Untitled Planning. I'm Alexandra, and today I'm joined by the marvelous Margaux.
Hello.
Margaux and I met, I don't remember when, but a while ago when we were both working at Steps.
Like spring 2021.
Yeah, 2021,
Yeah.
but like in the like height of the pandemic season.
Yeah.
But ultimately, yeah, working in like public art as young budding planners in different ways. But I'll let you introduce yourself and all the really cool things that you do. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, hello, I'm Margaux. I'm a urban cultural planner, placemaker. Yeah, we've met kind of like in public art, which was kind of my first like foyer, I'd say, like into public art.
Yeah.
Actually, like working with artists and managing it, which was really special. Do you want me to just, what else do I say?
Yeah, no. That's a good question. But no, that's it. Yeah. And I guess my question for you is how did you get into like urban planning specifically?
Yeah.
And then, for all those listening, Margaux works at MASSIV Art, which is
Oh, yeah.
I'll let you explain actually what that is before I
Yeah,
get
my
into
current title.
it.
That's a good thing to explain.
Yeah, but yeah, let us know how you got in, like your planning origin story, how you got into planning, and then specifically cultural planning, which is I think a unique subset that not many people know about because you kind of like fall into it, or at least I fell into it, and I know you did too. But yeah, for those who are interested, what is it? And then how did you get to MASSIV Art?
Awesome. Yeah, I'll kind of like start, I guess, like backwards with MASSIV Art and what I do now.
Yeah.
So yeah, MASSIV Art is a public art and placemaking firm. Really cool because we've got offices in Montreal, Toronto, and Mexico City. So
nice.
That was really like an attractive quality of this company.
Yeah.
So we kind of like work globally. We work on like projects that are public art focused, whether it's like a building and we're creating like a new facade that has an art integration kind of like into that building, or like we do placemaking. So another like easy way to understand it is like from an art perspective, we'll come into a place and add color to a public space. That's kind of like the most like basic form of placemaking in public art that we do. But like even above that, we transform public spaces into like really reflecting community values, whether that's creating more like seating, more color, more art, supporting local artists, bringing in international artists. So really kind of coming in that perspective. And then I'm their cultural planner. So cultural planning is like a weird term where I think everyone has a different definition of it, and everyone has a different take.
Yeah.
And I think even my own definition has changed throughout my career. I think I've had like the title of cultural planner for about a year. Only a year.
Okay, yeah.
A year, but it spanned 2 different companies. But I've called myself a cultural planner for about 4 years. Mainly because it started with like more of like a policy lens of like how do we support arts and cultural fields. So like how do we support artists, how do we support like theater production, how do we support like film production, how do we support like all these different kind of aspects of like what makes a space basically more than the environment you live in. You could take like a really broad stance of it. I think like that's where like my definition has kind of expanded from like really adapting to where your environment is, because I kind of think of culture like everything that's outside of your home could become culture, which is interesting. Like you go to a rural community and like their culture is not the same as Toronto. Their culture is like agricultural fairs and like their farming and like rural identity and like how that differs from like a city identity. So that's, and like when I'm working in those environments, I become an advocate for like rural culture, which is like not what I kind of like specialize in, but I can kind of transfer over to that. So it's quite broad in that respect. And then in my current role, I really work on like designing spaces and how to be design spaces through like a people-focused lens. So rather than just like how does someone like feel comfortable in the space, like sit in it, but also how can someone use it? Like how do you allow like a community group to host an art workshop in that space? And how do you design a public space that lets that happen?
Yeah.
How do you design a space that like reflects stories, like through art, through maybe like sound, incorporating different senses, kind of like creating more, moving beyond just like a beautiful space, and yeah, really creating it a lot broader is what my current focus is in.
Yeah, and I like that. It's funny because you work at MASSIV Art, but it's a bad pun. But you're working on really kind of like smaller like interventions though, like in public space, and I think that's the like magic of like I guess like quote unquote placemaking, but also like working in cultural planning and public art, because it's like these intangibles that sort of like you talked about that idea of having rural culture versus like you could say versus, but it's I guess it all comes down to the same premise or the same basis of like how do you bring people together and how do you make a place where people want to gather, which I think is really, there's like an art form, there's an art to doing it, and then there's art involved in doing it, which is really interesting. And then you can study it too, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, exactly. So like it's just like so fascinating. I think I'm like definitely a bit obsessed with like how complex it can be and why I chose it, but now I'll kind of like reverse and start my story of like how did I even find out about this? It actually goes back to like high school, which is crazy. I was like super fortunate, and like my career trajectory, like I wanted to be like a scientist. That was like went way back, but like I wanted to be a scientist. I don't know why. And so I was taking all these like hardcore science courses in high school, and I wanted like a bird course, like an easy A. And so I took this course called Green Industries. And
oh my gosh. That's a cool course for a high school.
Yeah. Cool.
In Toronto?
In Toronto, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And so during the course year one, you learn about like landscape architecture and like kind of like more landscape architecture and like planting techniques and like how to grow food in the city. And so that really like sparked something in me about food and about urban agriculture. Because we also know each other from Toronto Youth Food Policy Council, which is another kind of like thing that I also think is related to culture, very intertwined. And so I got into urban agriculture through there. I remember visiting like Downsview and seeing their urban agricultural like farms. And then the next year was urban design, and we redesigned parks. And I was like, that's cool.
What is this class?
I know.
I want to take it now. It sounds really great.
So cool.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Shout out to that teacher.
Yeah, shout out to that teacher. She was awesome.
Yeah.
She's like trying to like, she's great. Leslie Macbeth, she is like pioneering how to do school way better, and she did it.
Wow.
But yeah, and then I went off to university, did a full year of science, and I hated it because I was like, wait, what about that fun course that I did back in grade 12? Started looking up like related like terms to that course, like urban design, urban planning, found urban planning, and then got into TMU. Did my like first year of urban planning, my second year of urban planning, and then you like get into like what planning actually is. Which is like in your third year you start taking like planning law, you take like, honestly that was so traumatizing, and like it's the only thing that came to my mind, but like you take like some really hard courses, really dive into like policy, really dive into like land use planning, and that's where I found like my energy was like getting drained out of me slowly. People love it, you do you, we all need those land use planners out there. And I just like wasn't excited by it in the way that I like want to be excited about what I do in my life. And so I started, this is such a complex story. So
it's okay,
I started doing my internship at an affordable housing agency, so Kahila, Kahila residential program. And so was working there where I met Sarah Udo, and who was on their board. And so met Sarah at an event and was like kind of like captivated by like her presence and like
her energy, yeah, for
her
sure.
energy.
Yeah.
It's like very contagious. And I was like, hey, I want to kind of like basically get to know you. I like want to understand what you do. I knew that she was coming from a community engagement lens, and that's what I was like really interested in at the time. Is like, how do we, you know, go beyond just like your statutory public meeting? How do we actually make it fun? How do we engage more people than like, because there's so many barriers in community engagement. So how do we break that? Like, what is the cycle to break that? Now I know the answer. I like, it's art and culture is like how you break that, but I didn't at the time. So really like met up with Sarah. Sarah kind of like brought me into her organization that she was starting. So I was the first employee at Process, which was really exciting. Yeah. So my third year, halfway through my third year, I started working with Sarah at Process, and was just like, they were working on really cool projects. Like we were doing park redesign master plans. We were doing Whitby culture plan, Toronto public art strategy. So like we did an engagement plan for the Museum of Toronto. So like we were working on really cool projects. And I just like genuinely noticed like, oh, like, you know, I'm working on this like park master plan, and it's really interesting, and I love the community engagement aspect. But this arts and culture, like that's really cool. Like it started making me think about how culture just is so deeply entrenched in like how to make a livable city. And when you think about livable cities, like the things you're taught in school is you're like green cities. You talk about affordable housing. You talk about like kind of like social planning, which like touches on culture, but it's not almost at the same rank. And I view it as like such an integral part. Like you can go to the most eco-friendly city in the world, the most affordable city in the world, but is it going to be alive if it doesn't have culture? So for me, it's like one of those like core pillars of like good city building has to center artists, creatives, innovation, and along with that, it has to be tied to accessible like spaces. It has to be tied to affordable housing. And it has to be like green. So like they all for me are so intrinsically tied.
Yeah.
No, it's really interesting because like even going back to like the course that you taught, the course that you took. And like, you know, that course introduced you to like food, right? And then, like food is also intertwined with culture.
Exactly.
You know, like Toronto is like such a food centric city, and it's because we're fortunate to have so many different like immigrants coming in. So you have cultures from everywhere. You get a little bit of everything within a relatively small vicinity, and that shapes it creates a whole like economic niche ultimately. And it's funny because you're talking about that's kind of what introduced you to cultural planning, but then I came at it from like a different way as well, where I was like, I guess my background, urban studies, and then I ended up at STEPS, and that was my first introduction to like public art. Like honestly, I didn't really think you could make a job in arts and like kind of live well, to be honest, because the like struggling artist narrative is very prevalent. And I'm like, I don't consider myself a traditional artist in that, or like an artist in that way, but being able to be in this realm where you're surrounded by creatives and then still applying some other, like, I guess, quote unquote, technical knowledge from like urban studies and urban planning was really interesting for me. But yeah, like, and then that took me to my own personal like research interests in like community economic development, because we're working so like closely with artists, but like you're giving money to artists that are giving money to, they're creating like these spaces that people come in and they also spend money, but like, you know, and supporting different communities. So it's really like kind of like a cornerstone for so many things to happen. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now you remind me about why I didn't go into arts in the first place.
Okay.
Because my mom's an artist and I was banned from the arts as a kid.
Fair enough.
And so now it's like a bit of a mission of mine is to make sure that people can make a living. Like so much a part of my job is like when I write policy for cities, I'm writing how they should also be like funding artists and how that supports their economy. Because like another thing is like so many people are like, oh, it's just a nice to have, and don't realize like no, when you spend money in arts, the benefits are like quadruple back to you. For like your well-being, for like economy, for like absolutely everything.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious about, so that brought you into planning, and it's funny, you actually touched on the program quite a bit, so that's really interesting, because I have my sister is in high school, and she's going now into university.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to get her to be a planner. We'll see if that works, if she's watching this. But it works. One of her friends wants to be a planner.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So
whenever I find like young people, I'm like,
yeah, I know, I'm like, come, join us.
Yeah, this is a cool thing.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, like, I don't know. When I feel like it's so multifaceted, like you think about like economics, like if you want to be like, I don't know, if you want to go into business, I don't even know what business is, but I do it like, you want to go to like business. But like during my day to day, I do economics, I do like statistics, I do like law, I have to look at policy. Like it spans so many different fields, which is so interesting for someone who like likes to learn about many different things.
Yeah, for all those listening who are like, whether young or they're trying to, pivot their careers into planning, what advice do you have for them going into urban planning, but then specifically going into cultural planning? What should they keep in mind, or they want to like advance in this field, or just like enter it, period?
Yeah, I think like if you're getting into urban planning, like I think like definitely go to like an urban planning school. That's like basics. But also like keep your mind open in the school. I think schools have like changed even like drastically from when I went to urban planning school, where like mine was like very like strict and focused on like land use. And I think even now there's a lot more like broadness to urban planning. But like just keep your mind open that like if something intrigues you in the class you're taking, there's so much, like that's just like the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more. And also like notice what's lacking. Like I noticed I wasn't being taught about how to actually do community engagement, but it's a requirement for you to do it. And I was like, whoa, that's lacking. Let me go and find Sarah and like ask her how she does community engagement and then do that. Because like I wasn't getting it in school, and like it's important, it's scary to take initiative, but I did cold calls. Like I called organizations I thought were cool, and I was like, hey, can I work for you? Most of the time they said no.
And one said yes.
I didn't even ask to work with her.
Yeah, people like initiative, I suppose.
I don't know. Just like, so like I had like friends who like kind of like knew that they weren't really happy in urban planning when they were in school. You end school and it's like this like really like anxiety filled time where you're trying to find a job, and so they like landed jobs that like might have not aligned with like what they were interested in, and like that's why I kind of like recommend like try to figure out like what you could be interested in during school, and then use that time to like explore and like do the scary thing and call people. It's so scary. I'm an introvert, I get it, but like try to do it, and it definitely pays off. And then if you're trying to get into cultural planning, there's lots of like internships. Like, did you start an internship at Steps?
Yeah, I started actually. Funnily enough, we had a course, so it was like an internship course. So that was my first introduction. But in terms of how I actually ended up staying at Steps, it was actually kind of what you said, where I was like, it was a pandemic, and I was like, can I stay? I was like, can I stay? The world's ending. Let me do something if I'm stuck at home. And they're like, sure. And and then here I am. But it's ultimately an internship.
Internships are so good. Even like getting to know artists, like there's tons of like artist socials. So like if you're interested in like public art, like public artists are like so lovely as people, and they're like the most friendly people because their like job is also like somewhat public facing. Like they're constantly like open to questions, I find, or at least like are open to sharing or even like want to learn with you. And so I think they're just like the nicest people to get to know. And then, like it's hard because you do fall into it. Like it's a bit of like a niche
thing.
Way. But there's lots of organizations that are trying to get into it. And so just trying to see like who's doing it and like what type of take you want to take onto it. Like I do like half analytical, half creative. Like if we look at other kind of companies, some do like only analytics. They do more like cultural business cases. And then you have like the total other side of it where it's like they do like only public art management. So there's so many different facets. And then you have like also cities, like you can get a job at a city as a cultural planner. And those jobs are very different. Like it's very different than my day to day. Those are usually my clients. But
it's interesting. And I think one part that, well, I guess led me down my pathway in terms of my own research interest, but was also really interesting to me is that like, so like the city of Toronto literally has an economic development and culture division. So like even they get it like as a city that like they're so intertwined.
Yeah.
And then even if like I encourage anyone to like just look at their website and be like, what are the things that fall under that like kind of like jurisdiction of work? And it's so varied. Like it's like things that you wouldn't really expect, and I think that just kind of speaks to the diversity of work available out there, and then also what culture adds to cities and why it's important to support it in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And now it's like funny, like a part of my job is now going out to cities and being like, you should have a culture department. Yeah. And they're usually like, that's really scary. And I'm like, you'll thank me for this.
One day you'll understand.
One day you'll get it.
That's funny. Well, then on that note, I'm curious about like, what is your like, I guess, hope or like, what are you looking forward to, or what gets you excited in this field or in cultural work in general? Yeah.
I feel like so much. Also because you can play around with it. Like there's like dreams that I have of like, I want to combine culture and food and have that like more talked about and like understood as like another kind of like core principle. And like both like in like the sustainable sense of like having like local food sources, but also like in like broader like ethno-cultural sense of like celebrating different foods and different food practices and like bonding over that connection, and also having that connection like bonded through art. Yeah. Just like I don't know, like I don't know. Like my dream is just to like, especially I think like post-COVID, it's hard to get away from like pre-COVID and post-COVID. Yeah. So post-COVID, there's so much like need for connection. Yeah. And like really I think that's why like I love these two things, because they both like and they require connection. Like you need to connect with other people or to other people who like might not be present, but it's all about like human connection, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a good point. There's like this like a loneliness crisis that's like happening in cities. I don't know about all cities in the world. I don't think that's the case, because different cities have different still conceptualizations of like some cities are better oriented towards people living together versus like I would say Toronto, just point blank. Yeah. But like people are like lonely, and it's not just like the elderly where that's already a whole other like there's a whole other niche of issues there to like address to support that elderly folks, but just like in general where it's like I went to like a party recently, and then one of this other person I met was saying how hard it was to make friends, and then they were like on like there's like a Bumble but for friends. Yeah. And I was like, I didn't know that. Interesting. Yeah. They're like I'm on Bumble for friends, and it's like as hard as dating. Yeah. I was like, that's such an interesting insight, because I'm just like, okay, so you can't find people to meet with, but you're not the only person. And then obviously because there's a whole app devoted to trying to bring people together. So then like, where are these spaces to bring these people together? Where are the opportunities? There are none, or they're like behind paywalls. Yeah, like, you know,
or like involve things like alcohol, or like it's somewhat exclusive.
Exactly.
I know, and like because we have an office in Montreal, I've now like been able to go to Montreal, and like it's so vastly different. Yeah. Like you really feel how like empty Toronto can be, which like sucks. Like we're the biggest city in Canada. Yeah. And one of the biggest cities in North America, and like why does it feel so lonely? And like I spent a weekend in Montreal, and like it was like a weekday. I was there on Tuesday. Yeah. And it was like an evening. Yeah. And I was walking around with one of my colleagues who like didn't have anything to do with that evening, and so we're walking around and like just stumble across the street that's completely closed. Yeah. There's like, it looks like there's a street festival, but there's not. Like it's just a random Tuesday evening in Montreal. Yeah. People are flooding the streets. There's like little bands playing. There's like modular furniture. Mm-hmm. And we're just walking around being like, I would never see this in Toronto. Like I would never leave my house on a Tuesday night. Yeah.
If I didn't have to,
If I didn't have to. And usually if I'm leaving my house on a Tuesday night, I'm either like going to my friend's house to like sit on their couch. Yeah. Or I'm like going to pay for food, for like drinks. I'm going out to like pay something. Yeah. With like the cost of living is just like way too much, and so I can't do that anymore.
Yeah. So basically we're at home.
I'm at home.
How are your friends home?
My friends home. Yeah. But like here people were like out, like we went out to a restaurant and it was filled with people.
Wow. Yeah.
Like on a Tuesday night. Yeah. I could not imagine that in Toronto. Which is sad.
Yeah, I think honestly Montreal is a special case, or at least let's say in North American, or speak specifically to Canadian cities, because they've, like, my theory is that they've like held on to a lot of those kind of like roots of, like, I guess from Europe, honestly, and like if you've been to Europe, I don't know if you have been, but like when you go through the streets there, like they're just so oriented towards like people, like you're there, like the streets. Like I went to Paris recently, and I'm like, the streets there are meant for you to wander. Like you can just get lost, and that's fun. You're just like, wow, what is down this? And then you just like walk around. You're like, oh, like a little cap, and then or they're like, oh, the land, like if it's the landscaping, it's the streetscaping.
Yeah.
And I would say not even Montreal. Funnily enough, the other city I went to recently was Mexico City. Oh, and that's also a city to like get lost in. I was like, this is nice. Like you're like happy to walk. I'm like, who needs? And like, you know, because it's just like everything's a treat for your eyes.
Yeah.
And like people are just using spaces. And yeah, I agree with you. Like I remember going to the park or walking through one of the major parks in Mexico City. Oh. And yeah, so go ahead.
No, the parks in Mexico City are insane.
Yeah.
Like they're so filled with
people.
So filled with life. You like walk in and there's like a food market right away. And then like there's so many people walking around and there's like so many activities to do like in the park.
Yeah.
Wild.
No, it was a lot. And it's funny you're talking about vendors. I mean, going back to our food thing, is that like most of, like the only vendors we have here are like hot dogs.
Yeah.
Or like straight up hot dogs or like bratwurst. But like there you have like, it was like all kinds like fruits. You get like obviously meats and like vegetarian stuff, like
and like your sweets, your fruit.
Yeah, like everything like just from the streets. Like it's a very different like orientation, but it brings it to life because there's like people and I just also felt like people were using space differently. Like I would see like couples just like lying down, like, you know, just lying down, like enjoying like the sun and the sunlight, and then like the benches. My biggest thing when I was walking through, I look at the benches and I'm like, no, like those marks to like the dividers. It was like a really ornate, beautiful bench, and I'm like, this is so nice. I love this. I'm so happy.
So nice. Yeah. No, I like think it goes back to like just like North American like planning and like how almost like perfect we have to be, but then like how sterile it makes things. It's like we can't activate a park with like a bunch of markets because all those markets would have to be like permitted and they'd have to like pay for those permits, and like then they'd have to be like regulated, and then like security would have to be there, and like it would become this whole ordeal. And it's like why would anybody go through that? And then you go to like our streets, and our streets are like, they have to have like the perfect trees, and they have to be like all in line with like the perfect lights, and then you're like, oh, boring. I don't want to walk down that perfectly looking street. I want to walk down like this like beautiful like weird mixed match street and that has like cobblestone or like interesting houses. And
it's totally different. You said something interesting there, going back to like I guess the regulations that are put in place, and obviously we know they're there to protect people. They are, we know why they're there. But ultimately, they kind of take the fun out of like living, because like living together is really messy sometimes. But it's in that mess that some really fun things happen. And I think a prime example of that is like Cafe TO. Because I remember we were working really closely on it. Because so I guess for context, in the pandemic, City of Toronto started like Cafe TO, which is basically like honestly what every other city has been doing. Like a long time, in terms of just like having cafes like on the streets, or like not necessarily on the street, because you know, some cities have wider sidewalks, so then you can just having the space outside beyond like the actual storefront or the restaurant vicinity, like it makes sense for them to have a space there. But the way our streets are oriented, they ended up on the road. So anyway, the whole thing was created, Cafe TO, for the businesses to be able to like expand their footprint of like tables and stuff. But you know, it started the first year, and then it was started to help businesses. But then I remember reading recently that this year, 2 years removed from when it started, some like a lot of businesses were like there's too many rules in place, it doesn't make sense anymore, or there's too many fees in place, it doesn't make sense anymore. And I'm just like, oh, it's kind of a, you know, something that was meant to help. There's so many kind of like, I guess, red tape and things that make it not helpful anymore. So then we're back to where we started from the beginning. And
like that's like a kind of like a fear I'm sort of living in now, is like what's gonna happen, because at the beginning of the pandemic it was like there's so many like awful things that were happening, but like the one kind of like, I don't know, silver lining was that people just like kind of let loose. Like cities kind of let loose. They were like, we need to do something. We need to act in like emergency. We need to funnel funds. We need to like like let go of permits and just let things happen organically.
Yeah.
And like I've noticed it like if you think about like summer 2020,
Yeah.
no matter like how traumatizing that summer was for like so many different reasons, it was also so much fun.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
to go out to like cafes and like to like be able to like, I don't know, eat on the street and like walk around and like see so much public art and like just people kind of like taking over the public realm because that's all we had at the time.
Yeah.
And then compare it to like this summer where like I didn't sit on any Cafe Tio patios.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
Like there wasn't as much like visual kind of like attraction for me to hang out in the public realm. I work in public art and I do this thing as a living and I didn't feel that same energy because of like funding cuts, because permits were then put in place. And it's like, why fix it if it ain't broke?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. It's like, it's really disheartening to see and like very nervous for the future. And like, why can't we learn from what we did? And like, I wish that because I think collectively, like we all saw how great it was, but then we went back to kind of like business as usual, being like, oh, let's regulate it actually. Oh, the city can make money off of it. Let's add some fees.
Yeah.
Without realizing like how detrimental that actually is to city life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a balance. And but I think we're going to end this particular segment here. So stay tuned because we're going to be talking more about cultural planning and fun stuff, and tune into the next video.